Hello, folks. It's Sue here with Capstone Leadership Solutions. Hey, here in Fans of the Framework today, this live is all about behaviors. So really a call to action for healthcare organizations to get serious about behaviors. So, as employees in healthcare, employees want to show up for work, any place where they work, right? Employees want to show up for work feeling good about it. I remember one time I was at a healthcare organization and I was meeting with some employees, and one of the employees said to me that she starts each workday, with this feeling of dread, like, I don't want to. I mean, she used those words, I don't want to. And that's how she felt every day before going to work, is she didn't want to, you know? And at the root of that was behaviors in the workplace. She knew what she was going to show up to in her team, in her department, and she had a hard time getting ready for work each day and showing up to that, right? And when it comes to patients and visitors, right? They deserve to be met with behaviors that include things like kindness and helpfulness and compassion and respect, right? These are behaviors. So, behaviors matter so much in healthcare, right? And in the workplace, whether you're an employee working in healthcare or you're a patient or a visitor being served by a healthcare organization. So, how people feel about your organization, whether they're an employee, patient, or visitor, or a community member, has a lot to do with behaviors, right? So behaviors. So bad behaviors are costly. You could, stomp around the internet and you could find all sorts of information about the impact of incivility and bad behavior on an organization, right? Whether that's an impact on the workforce, such as high turnover or low productivity, or maybe it's an impact on your business as far as customers go. So will they return to you if they were met with behaviors that weren't so great? Do you have a reputation in the community that's poor and people won't choose you because of that reputation, and it has more to do about behaviors than maybe quality of your care? Okay, so there's a high impact that behaviors can have, good or bad, on your organization. So bad behaviors in particular should be a call to action as far as the costs go. There's a return on investment for improving behaviors. Great behaviors, we have come to realize, are highly linked to top ranking and award winning organizations. So we've done an exercise with now probably thousands of employees and leaders and providers in healthcare. And we've done these strategizing exercises where we ask them to vision this wildly successful organization that's like the utopia of healthcare. Like, everybody wants to work there. Everybody wants to get their care there. Everybody wants to be like them. If they're a healthcare organization, they are it. So when we ask them, what does that look like, right? What does that look like? They describe this, wonderful, amazing place. And then we ask them, what actions is it going to take? What do employees have to do? What do leaders have to do? What do providers have to do to get us to that place? What is the action plan? And almost 80+% of all of the actions that get listed involve behavior change. Okay, not new whistles and bells, not new buildings, not new programs, not new technology. Changes or improvement in behaviors. Okay, so that's right there, huge eye opener. And we know organizations that when they really work on this behavior thing, that is really about your culture, right? When we work on this behavior thing, results do improve, right? Things like those costs that are associated with bad behavior go down, and things like making improvements, making changes, advancing your strategies, all of those kind of things start to get easier. And when behaviors are better in the workplace. So how do we go about this, right? So behaviors are important. I hope I painted a picture that behaviors are important, and that as leaders of organizations, that this is an area of focus if we want to be a great organization. So when you look at behaviors, of individuals, our human condition, our humanness, is that, when you look at behaviors in the workplace, I could like to put them in two buckets. I know that's probably being too general, but let me put them in two buckets. So behaviors that are isolated and episodic. So, maybe I show up to work almost every single day, really adhering to standards of high behavior. I treat my coworkers with respect and kindness and helpfulness, and I treat patients and visitors, almost consistently. But once in a while, I slip from grace, right? So episodic, isolated, I'm having a bad day, I didn't get enough sleep last night. It's not chronic, persistent. It isn't something that I always, slip into, but, once in a while, nobody's perfect, we slip. So we've got, if you got hundreds or thousands of employees in your workplace and you got that kind of thing going on, there is a compounding effect of that, right? So just because I typically normally, don't behave in ways outside of these standards or expectations, sometimes I'm going to slip. But you put that across a whole bunch of people on a given day, and right there, we got some negative stuff going on there that could impact, again, the culture of your workplace, other people's morale and performance, patients, their satisfaction, their safety, etc. So that isolated episodic stuff from people that, rarely do it, sometimes we give a pass on that, right? Because, we understand that nobody's perfect or whatever, and we just give a pass on that. But because of that, there's a collective, compounding effect of those isolated episodic behaviors really equating to something undesirable that does have a negative impact. So that's one group of behaviors, is those isolated episodic behaviors that are kind of not what you want, but they're rarely, happening by certain people. So we sometimes give them a pass. And then there's the chronic, persistent behaviors that are maybe uncivil, definitely below our standards, what we don't want, and they're chronic, persistent, And a lot of times what we see with that, if people are given a pass on that, especially long term, is that usually they're a good clinician or technician, right? And so we give them a pass because of their technical competence or knowledge or skill. So over here, we're giving people passes because that's not in their nature, and we're just, being extra forgiving for that daily thing that might show up once in a while. And then over here, we're giving them a pass because of their technical competence or their value to the organization in that way. So what we have going on in healthcare is we're giving all these passes for these traps that we're falling into as healthcare leaders of why we're not doing something about it. And then, okay, we call that muster the will stuff. We don't muster the will to go after it because we fall in these traps. One, that's not their nature, and otherwise they're really great behaving, but today they're just having a bad day, I'm going to give them a pass. Over here, they're technically competent and skilled and whatever. And so even though it's chronic, persistent bad behavior, going to give them a pass too. So now we got all these passes going on about bad behavior, and we're wondering why, we're not wildly successful, right? And we don't have this culture that's amazing and for patients to receive care and people to work. So we fall into these traps, but then we can also fall into the trap of not knowing what to do about it. So what do you do in this isolated episodic situation where, Sue usually behaves very, very well, but today, oh my God, wow, did she just say that to that patient or whatever? And then over here, a lot of people don't know what to do with that chronic, persistent bad behavior that is, really, 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 long-term and long-standing. And how do we even change that? Can we even change that? And we don't have the skill to do that. So there's the will, and then there's the skill. And in each situation, you have to be equipped with what to do. So what do we do? What can work? And so, for almost 16 years now, a lot of the work that Jaden and I have been doing in healthcare has been related to elevating cultures and behaviors in the workplace so that people's strategies and results can flourish. And so these are the things, like what works to go after this. Well, number one is the organization has to put in writing and adopt and commit to in writing what are our standards of behavior. So that's kind of the starting point, is to put this solidly in place. So this isn't work rules, what not to do, don't sleep on the job, whatever. This is like behaviors that are written in the positive or the affirmative. This is what we want to do. So this describes what it means to be, a great teammate, or a coworker. This is what it describes, in behaving in a customer service kind of way. So really being positive about the behaviors you want and putting those in writing. And that's the starting point. And there's so many things just by doing that then kind of just like flourish from that. Like it just takes off from that. So it's a really foundational piece to have these standards, because, if you're a leader, how can you coach to or call out or, do anything related to elevating behaviors if we don't even describe what is desired and be very specific about that. So the first step is for the organization. We have all sorts of recommendations about, what those standards should look like and who should develop them. There should be a commitment ceremony in the organization once these are created. We call that almost like it's a new day kind of event, that, all these behaviors that were chronic and persistent, but also those that were isolated and episodic, that those are just in the past. And now we have a new day guided by these new standards, and we're all going to commit to them. And it doesn't mean there's pixie dust where all of a sudden you have these new standards and everybody's going to magically behave in accordance with them. There is no magic like that, but it does declare a line in the sand that it's a new day and we're all going to strive for it. And we all know what that is, and it's very clear. So that's the first step, is getting very clear on what it means to have behaviors that are set really high. And then for everyone to commit to adhering to them over time. And so it is a new day. And it also really helps leaders too, because like in the workplace, when I was a leader and I would go to somebody and have a conversation with them about their behavior, it's one thing to say, I noticed this and this is the impact of it and and have that conversation with somebody. But if I can't say to them, this is clearly what's expected, not just of you or me, but everyone, if I can't hold that out to them very clearly, it's really hard for me to say to them, you're doing this, but I want you to do this, right? Because what they can say is, Sue, you're being unrealistic. Like, really, come on. You have these high standards that are unrealistic, that nobody can meet, and only you have them. I could go work for somebody else and they don't have those high standards. So it's good to have that one set of standard consistent across the organization that applies to everyone. So when we call people out on their behaviors, or we need to coach them and support them to move in the direction of those great behaviors, that we can say, hey, here's the list of the standards, right? And this is what I need you to do. Like, this is the one. And this is what I see. It's not in keeping with this. This is the one, right? So those standards really set leaders up for success in being able to do their job as leaders, to give feedback to the standards. So that's the first step. You have to, as an organization, create those standards. And it isn't like, one of those policies that goes in a file somewhere and you never see it again, because that's another thing that has to happen next. So you have this commitment event where you draw a line in the sand. It's a new day. Everybody knows about the standards. And then you got to keep them top of mind and alive. And so that's where it really comes into having an employee-driven team, one, that writes the standards, and then two, they own keeping it alive or top of mind long-term in the organization. So having an employee-driven effort to have those campaigns that it's top of mind. I remember one time sitting with a group of physicians at one of our partner healthcare organizations, and I said to them, 6 months ago, your organization had a commitment event to these new behavior standards. What are you seeing different? Like, do you think it's getting better? Do you think it's the same? Do you think behaviors are getting worse? What are you noticing? And they said, they use these words. They said, wow, it just seems that behaviors are now top of mind and top of conversation. We're not quiet about it. We're talking about it. It's getting more normalized to talk about behaviors because it's always in front of us. It's always being brought up. Here's this standard, here's that standard, here's an example, and we're celebrating this standard, and it coming alive in our organization. So they said, and then they said, because it's top of mind, we catch ourselves. Like, I get ready to behave in this certain way and I catch myself. And so because it's top of mind, I'm now like catching myself in the act, right? And so that's a good place to start in elevating behaviors, is just that awareness and top of mind and presence that we have these standards. So that standard piece is so important. And then making sure that it's just not, an exercise we went through once and never to be heard of again kind of thing. So top of mind tactics, and we recommend being owned by an employee-driven team. And then there's the feedback piece. So, whether you're a leader or everyone in the organization can learn to give feedback related to the standards. So if somebody is in keeping with the standards and they're modeling that standard, that's part of our, standards of behavior, they should be complimented. And that's a form of feedback. And that can't just come from leaders to employees. In fact, we need 3 times more positive compliments and feedback and positive reinforcement for behaviors every one time we have to coach or call someone out, to have a real positive culture. And so where these behavior standards don't feel like a stick, right? We want them not to feel like they're a bad thing. We want them to come alive in a positive way. So, making sure that feedback is happening is one way to bring them alive in a positive way. So everyone needs to learn to compliment others and give feedback in the moment. Now, when I mentioned that group earlier, that episodic, isolated, once in a while kind of behaviors that pop up that are outside of standard, that's when it's great for everyone to be armed with knowing how to call somebody out. That's also a feedback conversation where we can call them out and say, hey, I noticed your behavior. I noticed. Okay. And again, it can't just be leader to employee, especially in that day-to-day, in the moment kind of feedback, because as leaders, right, we're not there 24/7, 365, riding on the shoulder of every one of our employees, giving them feedback about their behavior, but the people around them, their team members, they're the ones that, we're all adult professionals. They are the ones that can give them feedback, both in the form of compliments as well as call outs. And so training up your workforce to be able to, in the moment, give that feedback. It really doesn't have to come from a leader, especially that isolated episodic stuff. So if I show up for work today, I'm usually, one of those people that don't step outside of those behavior standards, but today I did. It's probably going to be one of my coworkers that calls me out on that. And they should, right? And they should feel psychologically safe to do that. We should all feel adult professional to do that. So we should learn both how to give that feedback, but also how to accept it. And the best acceptance of both a compliment or a call out is thank you. Thank you. And that kind of normalizes as well this whole behavior and feedback thing related to behaviors. Is we love this little phrase, I noticed equals I care. I noticed you holding the standards, and I'm going to compliment you. I care enough to compliment you. I care enough to notice and then compliment you. And then I noticed equals I care if somebody's outside a standard and I noticed and I speak up. I noticed and I care enough to speak up. So feedback, really important. So that omnidirectional, everybody giving feedback and receiving feedback and normalizing that is all part of bringing great behaviors alive in the workplace. Now, again, there's that chronic persistent behavior that, might be even in the severe forms of bullying. I mean, we've worked with leaders and organizations that have had to deal with this. I, in my career, have dealt with chronic persistent, incivility, either, in leaders Leaders can be bullies, providers can be bullies, employees can be bullies. So that's that extreme, chronic, persistent, bad incivility. And, having to deal with that is tough stuff. It might be that some of the toughest stuff of leaders, because behavior change is the hardest of all. So as leaders, do you have the will? Do you have the skill of what to do in that situation? Okay. So sometimes chronic, persistent, behavior performance that's outside of standards can be formally coached in a positive way. So there's a tactic for that. But oftentimes when it comes to especially those chronic, persistent bad behaviors, there's something that we call the 5-point correction conversation. And in one of my earlier live videos several months ago, it's in the recording and in the archive, I did some live events on positive coaching and on that 5-point correction conversation. And it works. We know that these tactics of feedback can work to elevate even sometimes behaviors that we never thought could change, long-term standing behaviors that we thought. So as leaders, we must, if we have an employee that works for us that's behaving chronic, persistently in this way, your other employees are looking at you as a leader going, my leader doesn't care about this. My leader doesn't know what to do about this. My leader is choosing not to do something about this. Is that fair? I have to work with this person 12 hours, 3 times a week. They don't. Why isn't my leader doing something about this? I mean, when it gets to that point, they feel like it's your job as a leader to do something about it. And it is when it gets to that point, right? So when it's that episodic, isolated stuff that's just popping up, right? Employees should be empowered and taught how to deal with it. And they can. It's very effective. But when it comes to chronic, persistent, and severe behaviors, as a leader, you can't turn your cheek to that. And again, leaders fall into that trap. Well, they're a great clinician, etc. So as organizations, when you draw that line in the sand, you better be serious and ready to go after this. Okay. You better be serious and ready. You better train up your leaders. You better, work with them to coach them to muster the will and master the skill to deal with that. Because if you draw that line in the sand, but then you keep giving these passes because you fall into that trap of, they're a skilled clinician and we can't lose them. Pretty soon, those standards aren't going to mean much. And we go back to those old behaviors that may not serve your organization or your patients well. So that's another tactic, is that feedback piece, both the informal in the moment and also the formal stuff that might be positive coaching or a 5-point correction conversation. And then, lastly, I want to talk about, how to get serious about behaviors in healthcare. Is really, it gets down to who we hire and fire. Okay. So when you hire, are you hiring for behaviors or are you hiring for skill? So behavior-based interviews, peer panel interviews, using behavior-based, interview questions, that's really important. If service is important, are you using a service aptitude kind of question, kind of survey or something in the pre-application? I mean, there's tools like that out there, but behavior-based interviewing is one of the best. Past behavior predicts future behavior. So figure out what you can find out about somebody's behavior before you hire them. So the other is, Michael Cohen did the foreword to our book, The Employee Experience. And in that book, in that foreword, one of the books he wrote is What You Accept is What You Teach. And I remember when I was a very young new leader, very, very green, I remember one of the first trainings I went to was held by Michael Cohen. And I wrote it down. I mean, I'm talking almost 30 years ago. I wrote this down, where he said 2 of the most important decisions we make as leaders is who we select to be on our team and who we allow to remain on our team. Okay. And so if that 5-point correction conversation doesn't work, what are the consequences? And that's part of the conversation. What are the consequences? And that can mean they're no longer part of your team, no longer part of your organization. And that's a tough leadership decision. It might be one of the toughest leadership decisions we ever make. And if you're a new leader, you probably inherited your entire team, right? You didn't select any of them. You got selected for the leader job, and now you come in and you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 employees, and you inherited them all, but you also inherited their behaviors. Okay, whether it's isolated or episodic or chronic and persistent. And we like to say this is 6 months after you are a brand new leader, it's like you hired all those people yourself and you selected them if they're on your team, right? So it's almost like you own them all now, right? So right away you have to understand, what are the behaviors in my team, and get serious right from the get out. But as I mentioned, who we select to be on our team and who we allow to remain on our team are huge decisions. And it's not just based on their skill and knowledge. Behavior probably matters most. Okay. And then, to wrap this up, let me find my notes here. I use this in the kind of the, write up for this event, is that, leaders often avoid dealing with behaviors. We fall into traps. We avoid dealing with behaviors, yet we're constantly consumed by it, right? So, it seems like it's kind of like this double thing going on here. We avoid it, yet we're consumed by it because you can't not be impacted by behaviors in the workplace. I love the quote by Dr. Deming that says, "Funny how we don't have time to improve, but we have plenty of time to resolve the same problems over and over and over and over again." It reminds me of a physician that I worked with many years ago. For many years, he was a disruptive physician, and I was the nurse executive, and not just in one of those, small file cabinets, but I'm talking about one of those big mega cadenza file folders, cabinets, an entire row, row of that was devoted to files related to over and over and over again, nurse after nurse after nurse, issue coming up about his behavior, the investigation of it, the resolution that really didn't resolve it, and filed again, and then another one and another one and another one. And then when my organization drew a line in the sand, set those, behavior standards, and said it's a new day, then there was consequences of what happens when people step outside those standards, right? And that was the very few people, but he was one of them. And, after a while, he consequenced himself out because he could not stay in adherence with those behavior standards. And you know what? The energy that we put into replacing him was way less energy than what was documented in that file cabinet, after all those years. You know what I mean? Like, where are we going to put our energy? Are we going to put our energy into, band-aiding the problem over and over and over and over again? Or are we going to fix it? And when it gets to that level, it's either, the behavior has to improve, or it can no longer be here anymore, right? That's really it. And fortunately, that 5-point correction conversation can work. It doesn't always work, but it can. And if it does, that's great. But these are the tough things of leadership, and it's your culture, it's your workplace. It's the place where very, very, very stressful and important business happens every single day that impacts the life of people, the people that work there and the people that are served there. And behaviors impact that. Bad behaviors can impact quality, safety, and in that case of that provider, it definitely, is going to have an impact on that when people are afraid to call the doctor to clarify an order, or call them during the night, to report a condition change on a patient, when that kind of fear is there, or call a provider into the ER to do a consultation on a patient and they just don't want them in there. These are real issues, you guys, that involve behaviors and the cost of bad behaviors. And as leaders, it's our job to do something about it. It is our job. We have a role and we need to muster the will and master the skill. And, these tactics I presented today are tactics that our partner organizations are using to be successful in the realm of improving behaviors in their workplace. So, if your organization is struggling with this, and like I said, most or all are at some level, and if you don't have any of these tactics in place and you don't have a plan for getting these tactics in place, a couple things I want to mention. Number one is that I am doing a winning with your people strategies workshop. So it's about visioning and creating an action plan for an organization-wide strategy around improving your people pillar, which does have a lot to do with behaviors. So I'm doing that on April 21st. There still is some spots open. We're not having a large a number of registrations allowed for this, mainly because it is going to be very interactive. I mean, it is going to be come and show up to work. So that's happening April 21st. And we're looking for up to 10 organizations. There's some spots left. So if you're interested in having your organization's senior leadership team vision and create a plan for a winning people strategy, register for that. There's information in the group for that. And then also our new Ascend platform is the way that we work with organizations long-term to get strategies such as this in place through the work of employee-driven teams and also strengthening and synergizing leaders. And so that's, kind of our primary work that we do is partnering with organizations long-term in this way to elevate behavior, performance, and contributions in the workplace to create top-ranking and award-winning workplaces and healthcare organizations. So if your organization is looking for kind of that more comprehensive approach to being supported in improving the employee experience, the patient experience, and strengthening and synergizing leadership, then Ascend is our way of working with you to do that. And if you're interested in that, please, just book a call with us, capstoneleadership.net /call, that, or go to our website, capstoneleadership.net, go to the contact us page. Either way. And you could reach out to us and schedule a call. We can talk about whether or not our Ascend services are appropriate for your organization, whether it might be a solution that works for you. We can show you a demo of all of the resources that are provided through that product. So there's a couple things that if your organization is struggling with its culture and day-to-day, the behaviors in the workplace, and are suffering the impacts of that in negative ways, and you want to turn that around, reach out. We've been helping organizations do this now over and over again for the last 9 years, and we just might be able to help you too. So thanks for your time today, and we will see you next time in my next live in Fans of the Framework, which is going to be a case study conversation coming up next week. Bye-bye now.